Let me ask you something that could change your life forever. What are you currently tolerating that's destroying your potential? Are you tolerating low energy, dead end relationships, uninspired goals, or the voice in your head that whispers, maybe this is good enough? Let me be brutally honest. Good enough is the enemy of great. If you don't raise your standards, you'll never raise your life. This is not another motivational speech. This is a wake-up call. Because Napoleon Hill, the man who interviewed 500 of the richest, most powerful, most successful people of his time, left behind a secret. A mental blueprint that turns average lives into extraordinary ones. And at the heart of that blueprint, raise your standard. If you stay with me for the next few minutes, I promise you this, you'll walk away with a weapon that can change your health, your finances, your relationships, your destiny. Your standards define your life. That's not just a clever quote. It's a truth that plays out in every single area of your existence. Think about it. The way you look, the way you speak, the people you surround yourself with, your income, your habits, your self-respect, all of it is directly tied to what you're willing to accept. When you raise your standards, you don't just change your goals, you change the way you live. The challenge is, most people never stop to ask, what am I settling for? Instead, they adapt to their environment, to their circumstances, to the limits others place on them. But adaptation to mediocrity is a silent killer. You don't feel it all at once. You slowly start giving up pieces of yourself, pieces of your potential, until one day you look around and wonder, how did I get here? And that's where the power of raising your standards comes in. Because the moment you decide you're done tolerating a certain level of life, when you truly make that decision, you start sending a message to yourself and the world. This is not acceptable anymore. That decision has force behind it. It starts to change what you notice, what you allow, and what you chase. You no longer spend your days with people who drain your energy. You no longer accept excuses from yourself. You stop waiting and start creating. Why? Because your standards won't let you sit still anymore. Your life will never exceed the standards you set for yourself. People love to say, I want more, but more is not a plan. More is not power. Standards are power. When you set a high standard, you force yourself into a higher level of living. Think about it like this. If you raised your standard to say, I only keep promises to myself, how would your habits change? If you raised your standard to say, I only associate with people who uplift and inspire, how would your circle change? If you said, I only accept results that reflect my best effort, how would your performance change? You wouldn't need external motivation anymore. Your standards would become your compass. Your identity would start to shift to match the level you've demanded. And once that shift happens, success is no longer a question of if, it's a matter of when. Most people think they need a new strategy. What they really need is a new standard, because strategy without a strong standard is just theory. But when you combine high standards with consistent action, you tap into something rare, something powerful. That's when you become unstoppable. Not because you're perfect, not because you have all the answers, but because you've decided that anything less than your best is simply not an option anymore. And that's the moment your life begins to transform. Desire by itself is not enough. That's the part most people miss. Wanting something deeply, passionately, even desperately is a great start. But without raising your standards, without creating a framework that demands action and excellence, desire fades. It becomes a whisper. Napoleon Hill said, desire is the starting point of all achievement. And it's true. Everything begins with desire. But what separates the ones who start from the ones who finish is standards. You can desire wealth, but if your standards for discipline, consistency, and learning are low, you'll stay broke. You can desire love, but if your standards for communication, vulnerability, and self-worth are low, you'll keep attracting the wrong kind of relationship. You can desire a strong, healthy body, but if your standard is skipping workouts and eating whatever's convenient, your body will reflect that. Desire must be matched by a standard that supports it. Otherwise, you're living in a fantasy. When you raise your standards, desire becomes fuel instead of frustration. Suddenly, you're not just dreaming of the life you want, you're building it every day with your habits, your mindset, and your environment. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop playing the victim because your standards won't let you fall into those traps anymore. You've decided, consciously and completely, that certain behaviors are no longer acceptable no matter how you feel. That's the moment desire gets teeth. It becomes a force. It starts pushing you through discomfort, distraction, and doubt. Look around you. The people who win in life, the ones who seem to have unstoppable momentum, don't have more desire than you. They have standards that back it up. They've trained themselves to act in alignment with their goals, regardless of the circumstances. They demand more from themselves when it's hard, not just when it's easy. They don't rely on motivation. They rely on internal rules that say, this is who I am. This is how I live. Anything else is unacceptable. If you want to turn desire into reality, ask yourself this: what standard must I raise today to honor my goal? It could be waking up earlier. It could be speaking more boldly. It could be cutting off toxic distractions. Whatever it is, if you raise that standard and enforce it with daily action, you will start to separate from the crowd. You will stop wishing for progress and start expecting it. Because in the end, it's not just about how bad you want it. It's about how high you're willing to raise your standards to meet it. Desire without standards is a spark with no flame. But desire backed by high standards, that's a fire that can't be put out. That's when success stops being a possibility and becomes your new baseline. Your identity will always rise or fall to meet your standards. That's why raising them doesn't just change what you do, it changes who you are. Most people try to change their results by changing their behavior temporarily. They'll get motivated, set a goal, work hard for a week or two, and then fall back into old patterns. Why? Because their identity never changed. Their internal standards stayed the same. They were trying to act like a high performer while still identifying as someone average. But your behavior will always snap back to the level of your identity unless you upgrade the standard. The moment you raise it, everything begins to shift at the core of who you are. You stop saying things like, I'm trying to get in shape, and start saying, I don't miss workouts. It's who I am. You stop saying, I want to be more confident, and start saying, I speak with purpose. I own my space. I lead. That's not fake it till you make it. That's deciding who you are now and backing it up with consistent action until the world has no choice but to believe it too. Standards shape identity, and identity drives behavior. When you raise your standards, you upgrade the blueprint your mind follows. You begin to say no to the things that once distracted you. You stop being okay with showing up halfway. You stop tolerating low energy, vague goals, and weak language. You raise the bar so high that your old self couldn't survive in your new life. And that's the point. You can't become who you're meant to be while still holding on to who you used to be. So ask yourself, who would I have to become to meet the standards I say I want to live by? Then live from that place every single day, not just when it's easy, especially when it's not. High standards are not rigid rules meant to restrict you. They are powerful boundaries that protect your growth. They protect your time, your energy, your values, and your future. When you don't have high standards, you become available to anything and everyone. You say yes too easily. You accept less than you deserve. You entertain distractions disguised as opportunities. And slowly you lose focus, you lose momentum, and eventually you lose belief. But when your standards are high, you become selective, not arrogant, intentional. You only give your time where it multiplies, not where it's wasted. You surround yourself with people who challenge and support you, not those who keep you stuck. You say no without guilt because your future matters more than someone else's comfort. Raising your standards is the beginning of building a life by design, not by default. It's the declaration that says, I will no longer participate in my own mediocrity. And when you make that decision not once, but every day, you will start to attract the people, habits, and outcomes that match your new level. Because the world cannot rise above what you believe you're worth. So believe bigger, demand more, and never lower your standard to fit a life you've outgrown. What you tolerate is what you get. That's one of the most brutal but liberating truths you'll ever hear. Everything in your life right now is a reflection of what you've allowed, accepted, or justified. If you tolerate poor health habits, your energy and body will reflect that. If you tolerate disrespect from others or from yourself, it becomes your standard of interaction. If you tolerate mediocrity in your work, your results will match that level. Life doesn't give you what you deserve. It gives you what you demand. The problem is, most people have gotten used to tolerating things that chip away at their confidence, dreams, and potential without even realizing it. They say it's not that bad or it could be worse, and that becomes their mantra. But let me tell you something. It not being that bad is not the same as it being good enough. If you're aiming for greatness, then not that bad should be unacceptable. And the moment you stop tolerating the average is the moment you start rising above it. You start recognizing the areas where you've been playing small. You become hyper-aware of your own compromises. That's the real work, raising your self-awareness to the point where you can no longer ignore the disconnect between your goals and your standards. It stings. It should. Because only when you feel the friction can you generate the force to change. Every excuse you've told yourself about time, resources, your past, your environment, they all start to collapse when you raise your standard. Because once you demand more, the excuses no longer fit the identity you're stepping into. You're no longer the person who puts up with less than what you know you're capable of. And here's the most powerful part. Raising your standards is not something someone else can do for you. It's a personal decision, often made in private, in silence, in frustration, in truth. One day you look at your life and say, I'm done. I refuse to keep living this way. And from that point on, everything starts to shift, not overnight, but inevitably. You begin to behave differently. You cut things off. You say no when you used to say yes. You start showing up on time. You start speaking up. You start investing in yourself. Not because someone told you to, but because you finally decided that the old version of you, the one who tolerated so much less than what they deserved, is no longer in charge. That's when the world starts to respond differently. New people come into your life. New opportunities show up. Why? Because the world reflects back to you what you reflect into it. When you raise your standards, you raise the signal you send to life itself. You stop chasing approval and start commanding results. You stop tolerating the noise and start attracting the signal. And in that shift, you begin to realize you're no longer hoping to get what you want. You've become someone who expects it because you no longer allow anything less. Raising your standards is a decision, not a gift. This is where people get it wrong. They think high achievers are born with some magical inner drive or superhuman discipline. They're not. They just made a decision at some point in their life. This is who I am now. This is what I demand from myself, from others, and from life. That decision is what separates those who succeed from those who settle. It's not luck. It's not talent. It's the choice to no longer tolerate the gap between where you are and where you could be. Once you make that choice, everything changes. Your identity changes. The way you speak to yourself changes. The way you walk into a room, set a goal, deal with failure, it all transforms. And here's the thing, no one can give you this standard. It doesn't come from your parents, your teachers, your boss, or your followers. It comes from you. You don't need permission to raise your standard. You just need to stop waiting and decide. When you make that shift, when you say, I will no longer accept anything below excellence in how I live, lead, love, and grow, it creates a ripple effect. You don't need to fake confidence. Your standards become your strength. You stop needing motivation because you've created an environment where the only option is progress. And yes, it's uncomfortable. It forces you to grow. It demands that you confront your habits, your patterns, your fears, but that's the point. The discomfort is not the enemy. The discomfort is the evidence that your life is no longer controlled by the version of you that tolerated less. Growth doesn't begin when conditions are perfect. It begins when you raise your standards higher than your excuses. And don't confuse this with perfectionism. Raising your standards is not about being flawless. It's about refusing to live below your potential. It's about making the decision every day to operate from a level that commands results. Not because the world owes you anything, but because you owe it to yourself to become what you were built to be. This isn't a one-time mindset. It's a way of living. A quiet fire inside you that says, I'm not here to survive. I'm here to lead, to grow, to conquer. That decision to raise your standards is not flashy. No one claps for it. But it's the most powerful shift you'll ever make. Because the moment you make that choice, you stop living by accident and start living by design. You stop reacting and start building. You become intentional, focused, resilient. And with every step you take from that standard, you become someone who no longer needs to chase success. You become someone success is drawn to. Not because of luck, but because you decided, this is who I am now. This is what I accept. And nothing less will do. You get what you fight for, not what you wish for. Wishing is easy. Everyone wishes. People wish for money, health, freedom, love, and happiness every single day, but only a few ever get them.
Why? Because wishing is passive.
Wishing doesn't require action, courage, or sacrifice. Fighting for something does. And the difference between those who live their dreams and those who die with regret is simple. The fighters raised their standards so high that anything short of progress felt like failure. They didn't just want success, they required it from themselves. They woke up with intention, not hope. They moved with discipline, not emotion. And they kept going when motivation disappeared, when it got hard, when no one was clapping because they weren't waiting for things to get easier. They were too busy becoming stronger. You have to understand, the world doesn't give you what's fair. It gives you what you demand with your mindset, your work ethic, your persistence. When you fight for something, it means you've committed your energy, time, focus, and pain to it. It means you've raised your standards to such a level that turning back feels like betrayal. It's not about aggression, it's about relentless intent. It's about refusing to let excuses be louder than your reasons. Most people don't fail because they're not capable. They fail because they're not willing to fight past discomfort. They lower their standards the moment life pushes back, but fighters don't fold. Fighters don't downgrade the dream. They upgrade their habits, their circle, their focus. If you want something, really want it, then stop fantasizing about it and start fighting for it. That fight might look like waking up earlier. It might mean training harder, learning more, investing deeper. It might mean cutting off people who pull you backward. Whatever it looks like, understand this. If your standards stay low, your results will always follow. Because you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your standards. So, raise them. Make it non-negotiable to show up at a higher level. Don't leave your success to chance. Force it with your actions. Earn it with your grit. Stop hoping to get lucky.
Luck is attracted to people in motion.
Luck finds the prepared, the bold, the disciplined. When you start fighting like your life depends on it, opportunities start showing up, not because of magic, but because you're finally ready to do something with them. That's what happens when you operate with high standards. You stop needing permission. You stop waiting for signs. You become the cause, not the effect. And the world starts to move in response to your certainty. So don't just wish. Decide. Commit. Fight. Raise your standards so high that your only option is to win. Because if you're not willing to fight for it, you don't really want it. And if you are, the world has no choice but to make room for you. So here's the truth, brutal, clear, and undeniable. The life you want is already waiting for you. The version of you who has everything you desire, the confidence, the wealth, the love, the freedom, that version is not a fantasy. It's a reflection of who you could become the moment you refuse to live below your potential. The bridge between where you are and where you want to be is not luck, it's not timing, and it's not talent. It's standards. What you accept, what you demand, what you decide you will no longer tolerate.